So today we'll dive deeper into the topic of agriculture in a well-being economy. And we'll explore what agriculture and our food systems could look like in a well-being economy. Now, my name is Margriet Vrieling. I'm a knowledge co-lead at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. In today's session, we'll be hearing from Milo Costanza-van Belt, the lead author of the Agriculture and Wellbeing Economy paper, as well as Ferne Edwards, who's an alternative food systems expert from Surrey University. Now, after both of their presentations, I would then love to open up the floor to all of you to ask your questions and share your reflections on this topic of agriculture and food in a well-being economy. But I'd love to start by introducing Milo. So Milo is a master's student at Wageningen University with a land and water management background. He's previously worked as a researcher at the Australian National University, analyzing the implications of environmental water allocations in Australia's Murray-Darling Basin. Now, from our conversations, I know that Milo is very passionate about the move to a well-being economy and developing food and land use systems that are just, sustainable, and secure. Now, before I hand over the floor to you, Milo, I just wanted to share how much we've appreciated all of the hard work that you've put into this paper. Milo's been working on this alongside his studies and alongside all of his other work commitments. So I just want to express the enormous gratitude for all of the work that you've put in. And I know that Milo is actually very keen to treat this as the starting point of a conversation rather than a finished product. So that's definitely something we'd be very keen to explore with all of you today, to see how we could build on this and really see this as a starting point for moving forward. So very happy to see so many of you here today, and I'd love to hand over to you now, Milo, because we're all very much looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Margaret. It's been an absolute pleasure working on this paper and learning so much about the wonderful solutions that are being proposed all around the world to move to an alternative food system. So I'll just share my presentation. Give me a second. Okay. Does everybody see that now? Is that working okay? Yep. And if I do this, then does it still show up?
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
Just making sure that I can still see my my notes as well. Yeah, okay. So as Marguerite said, I'm really looking forward to having a discussion about how we can position ourselves as the WEAll network to meet the challenges of our current food system. And it really could not be more of a important time to be working on these solutions with everything that's going on in the world. So this paper is meant as a primer for non-academic audiences. It's meant to be solutions focused, so we're focusing less on explaining the challenges and more on kind of highlighting the solutions. So we're including some inspiring examples of that I think exemplify the vision of a sustainable, secure, and fair system that would fit into a well-being economy. It's not a comprehensive technical assessment. There are already a lot of great reports that do this. So three that I would highlight if anybody wants to go deeper in this would be the Creating a Sustainable Food Future report from World Resources Institute, the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World from FAO, and the Eat Lancet report. So those are some of the places that I drew on for this paper as well. We're also focusing just on agriculture, so not on the consumption side solutions, because the production side, we really found that was complicated enough as it was, and it became too much of a difficult topic to include both of those in this paper. So yeah, the aim is really to outline what the alternative vision for a food system could look like, and namely that would be we want an agricultural system that provides sustainable access to healthy food, that's secure and resilient, and that's fair for food producers. So yeah, why is this necessary? To me, agriculture really typifies the inherent issues with our global growth-focused or growth-addicted economic system. Of course, this isn't the case everywhere. There's a lot of positive examples, but globally, the food system is one that exploits workers, it exploits land and water, and at the same time, it's providing increasingly unhealthy and nutritionally sparse food products. One reason for this is that, much like a lot of other industries, the goals of the agri-food corporations that set the agenda are increasing their profits. So we really see a race to the bottom where food producers are squeezed from the top to exploit their land and workers as much as possible to produce the highest volume of crops without consideration for other factors like nutrition or like the long-term sustainability of their land. So it's impossible to generalize the situation of farmers globally, but because there's such a diversity of farming practices and ownership arrangements. But at the same time as this, many farmers are facing growing debt and growing poverty because of the way that the system is set up. And of course, agriculture globally is one of the main drivers of the interconnecting environmental crises that we're facing. And I saw a lot of people in the chat when they were introducing themselves mentioning that as a reason why they're interested in looking at solutions. So to exemplify that, I'll just show the three gaps that the World Resources Institute identified that we need to close by 2050. So the first is the food gap. So because of increasing population and increasing demand for food, we're likely going to need to provide 56% more food, more calories by 2050 than we do today. This was in, So then the second gap is agricultural emissions. As I'm sure everybody knows, agriculture produces a significant amount of emissions. And if we don't have any productivity gains by 2050, that is looking to increase quite significantly. So that's another gap that we really need to be closing. At the same time, agricultural expansion is growing. And again, if we don't have any productivity gains, that is going to be growing significantly by 2050. And really the goal should be to bring that down to zero. So we need to be producing more food with ideally the same amount of land, while also bringing down agricultural emissions. And looking at that another way, we can also look at the planetary boundaries. And many of these are linked to the agricultural system. So climate change, land system change, freshwater use, majority of the world's freshwater use goes towards producing food, and biochemical flows, so phosphorus and nitrogen flows, are all really related to how we produce food. I'd also add to that that we have a lot of topsoil loss in a lot of the world's food producing regions. And there's strong evidence that we're facing an insect crisis, which would have massive negative impacts on our ability to produce enough food for the world's population. So closing these gaps will be a massive challenge. And there's a lot of concerns that if we move away from conventional agriculture, that we simply won't have the yields that we need to feed everybody by 2050. But if we look at the depletion of productive soils globally, the loss of biodiversity, the loss of water quality, all of these issues that I just mentioned, we can see that the business as usual approach also will not be able to meet this goal. So we need to be doing things in a dramatically different way. So what would that look like? And I guess this is kind of a question as well for us to be considering, and that I'd love to discuss with everyone here. About how we can, what that would look like, how we can ensure that everyone has access to a healthy diet while restoring these ecosystems now and in the future. So what would that look like? There's been a number of different proposals for how an alternative food system could look that's more nature-based. Regenerative agriculture, agroecology, permaculture, these all kind of have slightly different practices, but the goals are very much the same. And this is just a table of some of the differences between conventional agriculture and taking a more regenerative or nature-based approach to farming. So I'm sure Ferne will also share some of her experiences working in this space, and some examples of that farmers can learn from. But one more that I'd like to just highlight for everyone is the global network of lighthouse farms from Wageningen University, where I'm currently studying, which has a lot of very inspiring cases from around the world of how farmers have been able to integrate some of this more nature focused farming successfully in a way that doesn't minimize their profits. So yeah, this is something that is obviously very important shift that we need to be making. But why have we not been able to do this on a global scale yet? So the main problem is that the food system, that transitioning the food system to a more regenerative model would take significant upfront investment that a lot of farmers don't have. So, if farmers are struggling with debt, it's very hard to shift from this conventional approach that they've been following for decades to this more regenerative nature-based approach. And that's something that the governments really need to step up and help support. And I think we need to think about how that kind of support could look. So another important aspect is ensuring that food stays accessible during shocks and environmental disasters. And I think that over the past few years, this has become increasingly relevant and also increasingly important with climate change. We saw how fragile our food supply chains were during the COVID pandemic and the invasion of Ukraine. So regenerative and nature-based approaches will get us part of the way there to making our food system more resilient. But this goes hand in hand with crop diversification. We also need to be thinking about diversifying production on larger scales, on regional scales, so that if one region is facing droughts or floods or conflict, it doesn't drive up the prices for those that are already in poverty. So how can we kind of redesign the global system to become more diversified so that we can maintain accessibility no matter what shocks happen to the system. Then on a smaller scale, the paper also highlights some urban farming and free food store solutions, which are able to shorten supply chains and address some of the distribution issues that are inherent in the food system as it currently is. And this is all well and good for consumers, but we also need to make sure that farmers are brought along in this solution. We need to make sure that the food system is fair for those farmers as well. So one way we can do this is by shifting from a corporate farm ownership model towards a more community ownership model, as well as by reforming the global systems of trade that are currently unbalanced against small-scale farmers, and by putting policies in place that support the rights of small-scale farmers to their land. So this will look very different depending on the social and political contexts, but it's very important that farmers are really seen as the source of these solutions rather than kind of the antagonists. So similarly, a lot of regenerative practices are now becoming more mainstream, but it's important to recognize that this is built on indigenous knowledge and in a lot of cases. So it's important to be empowering like local and indigenous solutions, and particularly to be empowering indigenous people in conversations around agricultural practices and policies. Those are voices that historically we've kind of been shut out of this conversation, but in the situation that we're in right now really necessitates those solutions that have been built on thousands of years of connection to country in some cases to be driving us forward and helping us solve these problems. Oh, there. So overall, we really need to rethink our agricultural systems on local, national, and international scales. And I really like the metaphor of moving from economics as machine thinking to economics as gardening to create conditions in which our natural environments and societies can flourish. This is a metaphor from Gürol Karakoglu from the Victoria University in Wellington. And I think that it's really relevant when we're thinking about food and agriculture. Moving from this kind of farming based on balance sheets and purely for yields and profit, to also considering the impacts on the environmental system, on people, and on justice. So I've left these 3 remaining questions for us as a group to kind of ruminate over and hopefully discuss a little bit of. Those are: how can we as a network catalyze this change? Where should we concentrate our efforts? And what gaps need to still be addressed in order for us to be able to do that? So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas.
Thank you, Milo. That was fantastic. And I would highly recommend to also have a look at the briefing paper more in detail. There are a lot of case studies in the briefing paper, which really helps to illustrate all of these different movements that need to be made. There are already some questions coming in. Thank you, Nigel. We'll be opening up the floor after the next presentation, but it's great to see that there are already questions popping up. And great to also be discussing those questions, Milo, afterwards, about what we can do as a network, as an alliance, to help move this agenda forward. So for now, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Ferne Edwards. So Ferne is currently based at the University of Surrey in the UK, but she's conducted research on just and sustainable cities across Australia, Venezuela, Ireland, Spain, Norway, and the UK. She's written and edited several books on this topic, including the edited volumes of Food for Degrowth, Urban Natures, and the monograph on food resistance movements. And she's contributed to many EU projects on this topic as well, including Share City and Food Click. So we're very grateful to have you here today, Ferne, and I'd love to hand over to you.
Thank you, Marguerite. I'm just going to set up the PowerPoint. Please let me know if it works. Does that look okay? Can you hear me?
Brilliant. Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. Okay, that's good. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'll just move that across. Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation to present at this event. I'm going to put my timer on. We're going well already. Okay. Groovy. In preparation for this talk, I was asked to present examples of what the food system could look like in a post-growth economy. And this proved to be a difficult question, as there's no one singular example or pathway of change. So instead, what I've chosen to do is to show partial examples of food system change in a variety of different contexts. And these examples come from my work on just and sustainable food systems from around the world, including working on various international projects such as Share City, EdiSitNet, and Food Click. So is the pictures in the way, or is it okay? You see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So from these examples of change, I highlight some of their key characteristics that provide glimpses of what change could look like in a post-growth world. So degrowth and food, I draw mainly from this text, Food for Degrowth. It relates to the post-growth economy by sharing the view of monetary growth-driven capitalist economy as a source of social and ecological crisis. It challenges an industrial food system that's predicated on damaging externalities and inequalities. And it seeks to transform socioeconomic structures to satisfy all people's needs and to provide a regenerative approach to planet Earth, modest material energy flows, and general well-being. So the first aspect from the examples is what we call frugal abundance, which celebrates local diversity through sharing goods and services, knowledge and skills, while enabling social and environmental efficiencies and direct governance. It also incorporates aspects such as food sovereignty, aims to eradicate waste, and acknowledges convivial eating as a social pleasure. An example of frugal abundance from the book is provided by Jones and Ullman, an Australian rural family who speak of how they transition from a capitalist to a belonging economy based on permaculture ethics. And the actions include taking personal accountability and deep thought in how to shift assumed practices and expectations from a formal to a more informal economy, where small-scale food production is central to this change. Theirs is a radical experiment in living degrowth that's rooted in place, where they question what they wear, eat, how to gather basic materials, and how to heat their home. And through these actions over time, their family is able to meet 70% of all their needs. Furthermore, rather than wait for policy change to happen, they find that the storing of degrowth is an essential aspect of telling the story, of communicating this. And I highly recommend watching their full video of their chapter, which is available on YouTube. The link's at the bottom of the screen, which takes you through the steps of how they've transitioned to a degrowth economy. Another chapter by Danek and Jelika further illustrates how abundant small-scale food production can be, where they document household food production in dachas in Central Europe. And dachas are a form of allotment garden that appear on unused land during rapid industrialization and migration in the second half of the 19th century. They've often assumed to be a negative thing, as they're typically framed as a coping strategy for the poor. However, the authors seek to reverse this assumption by documenting their continuing popularity. So Danek and Jelika undertook a national-wide survey of more than 2,000 households that revealed that almost 40% of all Czech households use their plot for growing some food. When gifts and other forms of sharing are also included, non-market consumption reaches up to 2/5 of the population. So in other words, you can produce a lot to eat using a degrowth ethics of practice. Furthermore, the authors argue that food self-provisioning can be quiet, defined as a common sense and non-activist way of food procurement, which is large-scale, socially inclusive, and long-standing. And the data shows that rather than be a coping strategy, food self-provisioning can also be a convivial and pleasurable activity. So in other words, it serves as a form of unintentional activism where spaces are constructed that do not actively oppose capitalism, but instead stand largely to the side. Hence, the authors illustrate another way of doing degrowth differently by bringing informal economies from the margins to the center of academic and political debates to illustrate Gibson Graham's claim that the dominance of capitalism is more discursive than real, where food self-provisioning is one way in which to deliver on many of degrowth's objectives. Okay, so another example is wild harvest. This further broadens what we consider to be food outside of commercial systems. And so an example in the book comes from Nairobi, where Bruckner describes how women are using African indigenous leafy vegetables to support diverse economies of food provisioning in and beyond the city, while sharing culinary knowledge, skills, recipes in communal cooking sessions. So AVIs are slowly making a comeback in everyday food practices after being marginalized and stigmatized as weeds, resulting from a history of colonial practices and a growth-oriented agri-food system. AIVs are accessible, resilient, environmentally friendly, and free. They can be harvested several times per year, are recommended for drought tolerance, and are often are rich in micronutrients. So in Kenya alone, there's more than 200 species, where 20 are commonly consumed. So Bruckner also shows how degrowth discourse parallels with Indigenous and sovereignty movements, where both focus on sustainable use of natural resources. Both have that, and by doing so, they can promote Indigenous knowledge and crops for a diverse and resilient ecosystem. And following on from Escobar, who states that explicit bridges between transition narratives in the North and in the South need to be built, this research also reverses degrowth from the North emphasis to instead show inspired examples from the South that the North can learn from, to reverses that trend. So another example is careful. And this is a general point that comes out of many of the chapters, is this focus on care, caring for oneself, for other humans, and for non-human nature. But also what the chapters drew on was this care being extended to other gendered roles. So where authors acknowledge that degrowth needs to address these implicit gender assumptions, to develop an understanding of their negative effects on the gender hierarchy, and to consider positive possibilities regarding fair gender relations in the future. So, for example, Holmes et al. Focus on the often invisible tasks necessary for sustaining community-supported agriculture in Spain, where the authors acknowledge how typical issues of CSAs, such as dwindling waiting lists, loss of participants, and time-consuming workloads, often fall on women, creating tensions with other forms of care work, such as caring for children, paid work, and other forms of activism. So in other words, Holmes et al. Raised the question, who is doing the caring, and are they being adequately cared for in return? So too, do the authors provide some possible solutions to sort of address these issues, such as new models of CSAs that can diversify degrees and types of participation, to reformulate the practice of self-management, and to make workloads more flexible. So care also needs to be extended to adequately acknowledge the rights, values, and agencies of non-human natures in food systems. So many in the examples, again, in the book do this. For example, Jones and Ullman mention the relational ties that need to be strengthened between human and non-human natures in learning how to belong locally. And Pungas recognises how gardening and dachas in Estonia use stewardship as social acts to connect to soil and ecosystems. However, this is an area that still does require more research. In other literature, I highlight that new skills are needed to work with and live with nature in close proximities, where in the example of urban beekeeping, we need to shift to a more embodied knowledges and different tempos, such as learning how to listen and learn from other species around us. So an urban beekeeper gave me this amazing quote down the bottom here. I can go to a beehive and lift the lid off and have a listen and a smell. The bees talk to me. I can hear the different sounds they'll make for different things, but you've got to listen. You've really got to listen. And to start with, it all just sounds like a buzz. But after a while, you get to hear the different sounds and what they mean. So it's a really cool aspect of looking at that. Moving on, care also becomes apparent again in the use of technologies for degrowth. So with Ricarda Spelt, I draw on Kirshner et al.'s use of framing of technology to ask if technology in community-supported agriculture in Catalonia is viable, feasible, convivial, and appropriate for retaining the goals of degrowth economy. So we focused mainly on Lashada, so one of 56 CSAs in Barcelona that had integrated online technologies within their practice. And members had designed their own open source digital platform to support logistics, reduce workload stress, and enable the expansion of their tasks. So this tool made by Lashada was then shared with other CSAs to help promote the movement. So recognizing the potential co-optive influence of technology, Lashada chose for their tool to be offline, requiring members to attend the cooperative in person to place orders. And you can see the quote there by one of the members. So they sort of say, for that reason, our philosophy is to be part, to share, to talk, to have that social presence, to maintain those social connections. So this example shows that while members of Lashada accepted technological innovation, it was done carefully and on their own terms. They prioritized members' social relationships rather than technological integration, yet still considered its application as both viable and feasible to lessen the typical problems of CSAs, strengthening their ability to promote ethical consumption within and beyond their cooperative. So working with the tools that are available, but doing so carefully. Another example is participatory decision-making. So many initiatives, such as Lashada, incorporate governance strategies to ensure inclusive decision-making. And in another body of initiatives around this, which I refer to as autonomous food spaces, that's from my book, Food Resistance Movements, Can Masteo is another example in Barcelona. It's an alternative education centre and home for more than 20 activists in a squatted hospital located in peri-urban Barcelona. So Members at Can Masteo, as well as Lashada, they all employ approaches such as autogestión, so self-management, supported by horizontal and direct democracy by using techniques of shifting leadership. They also do comisiones, so working groups to address specific tasks, and regular asambleas, group meetings to reach agreement by consensus. And I always love to refer to this, I think of this as a tug of war, through which you learn to debate, discuss, and reach a consensus by, drawing people over and discussing your ideas in lots and lots of detail. Okay, so such approaches appear to be largely successful. Both Lashada and Can Masteo are more than 15 years old, which is very old for an independent group in these examples, demonstrating how governance processes can help maintain a collective ethical lifestyle in a changing yet commercially dominant world. To also note that these methods can be applied both internally or externally instigated. So, for example, there are a lot of EU food projects such as EdiSitNet and FoodClick use approaches such as living labs and co-creation, a democratic, participatory and creative process to adapt degrowth ideals to local conditions. So finally, to mention the need for networks to scale up.
Oh, I think someone may have left their to continue then.
I'll keep going. Okay. So finally, the network, to mention the need for networks to scale up and out degrowth practices to others, where polycentric and multi-level governance approaches are being implemented to enable equitable participation in decision-making processes. So example there, I worked with Pedro and Roca to explore multi-level governance in international projects, to enable diverse groups to reflect and embrace opportunities across different sectors and governance levels. And in my current position at FoodClick, we embrace both horizontal and vertical methods of food system change, looking at things like food policy networks and integrated city region food policy to bring these things together. However, we do recognise that that these are just some of the many ways that food system change can occur. So, how can food contribute to just and sustainable transitions in a post-growth economy? These examples show us that degrowth can look like many different things for different people in different places. And I think their strength comes from their diversity. The case studies are diverse in terms of their different scales, the different types, the different sites of instigation and management, the different diets, different approaches, which range from different types of technology, alliance building, gender, Indigenous empowerment and governance, and in the recognition of different species. And this diversity can provide accessibility to meet a wide audience's needs. It can add new forms of value, provides place-based, innovative and sustainable forms of food procurement, can catalyse new personal and professional relationships, reveals political frames to challenge and respond with alternatives, and can promote collective forms of sustained change. So in summary, in my final summary, these examples paint many pictures that can be embraced towards a post-growth economy that include being frugal, quiet, wild, careful, more than human, technologically, ethically adapted, participatory, and networked. And furthermore, they demonstrate that food degrowth alternatives already exist in the world, that they are and will need to be diverse, dynamic, place-based, and complex. And they act on two levels, to challenge both the social imaginaries of how economies and societies should work, as well as in the political economic structures that uphold and reproduce these imaginaries. I also acknowledge that these partial and dynamic examples face various challenges, illustrating that it's not a one approach to fix all, it's not instant, and it's certainly not simple. So I hope this presentation has provided you all with some key aspects to think about towards creating more just and sustainable food systems towards a post-growth economy. Thank you. It's me.
Wow. Love that, Fern. That was amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for all these insightful reflections and so many different examples that illustrate all the different strands of this transition and how that depends on local concepts. Love the concept of frugal abundance and also this principle of careful and the importance of listening. So what I would like to do now is to open up the floor to all of you to share your reflections, your questions that you might have, your thoughts and suggestions. So you can either raise your hand or you can pose your question directly. You can raise your hand and pose your question directly, or you can of course put it in the chat and we can read the question out for you. I know that Nigel from Wales already had a question. I think that was related to the upfront investment that was needed. Nigel, would you be happy to share a little bit more about your question?
Yeah, sure. In Wales, we're currently going through a process where we're campaigning on the new sustainable farming scheme that's basically replacing the basic farm payment. Farmers have been working within subsidised agricultural systems for 50 odd years, working within that system given, which perversely intensified the countryside and the landscape, hence the state of nature, hence a landscape that cannot cope with climate breakdown. So we're recognising that, working under the Wellbeing Economics or the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales, and we're shifting towards the sustainable farming scheme. But we know, well, we've just had a budget release and the rules of fair budget has been slashed considerably. And at the moment, the farmers are looking at the new scheme and going, will it even match the basic farm payment for us to farm differently? And you're expecting farmers to change their practices that have been embedded over 50 years. You've got to nurture them back towards incentives that enable sustainable farming systems, nudging them back towards foundational economics and things like food sovereignty. But that's not going to happen overnight, obviously. Where does that money come from when that system of growth economics has inflicted austerity on the world? How do you turn that around to enable that money to flood in without using blended finance and private finance, which often comes with a shed load of greenwashing?
Thank you. That's a very important question. I'm not sure if it's necessarily an easy question to respond to, but Milo, I know that you've also mentioned the importance of upfront investment in your presentation. Would you be happy to provide your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the billion-dollar question, right? Like, and if I had an answer to that, then you know, it would be a lot easier to solve the problem that we're in right now. I don't know that much about the context of Wales, but I know that this is something that a lot of countries are facing right now. Also in the Netherlands, the Dutch government was proposing a change to the way that the agricultural subsidies work, and yeah, basically, you know, it led to massive protests from farmers who saw the proposal as, you know, kind of taking the subsidies away from them in the same kind of way. I think it's really, yeah, I think this is really where the shift in agriculture to this more sustainable alternative relies on a more general shift towards a well-being economy. Like you said, you know, like tackling this, you know, the austerity that comes from a growth dominated economy would free up more of the types of, free up more money for the types of policies that could support farmers to transition to more sustainable practices. I think on a small scale, some farmers have been able to you know, make this transition kind of on their own, and you know, and over a longer period of time. Then it just kind of involves shifting some of their farming practices to more sustainable, and then, you know, just kind of doing it in a more incremental way, rather than the type of full-scale system change that we probably arguably would need right now. But I think another idea would really be about changing the way that agricultural subsidies work in general, and potentially, like, I think that this is something that we need to be thinking about around the world. Like, there's in any country that has agricultural subsidies, we need to be thinking about how we can shift subsidizing just yield to be to subsidizing the type of farming that we want, right? And that's going to be looking very different in different countries. I don't think it's up to me to say what that would look like in Wales. But yeah, I think that's an important question to be having. And I'd love to hear, potentially, Nigel, from you, like what you think would be necessary in the context of Wales specifically.
I think, just like an ecosystem, none of this works in isolation. And I think the system change is essential to enable this kind of thing to work, or to acquire the right kind of levels of funding to assist it to work. So I don't know, I always believe that you need a very public, almost public information campaign as such, to raise awareness of why the general public should buy into wellbeing economics. Corporate marketing really sells us items and consumerism very efficiently and very well. We're not very good at countering that. And I think you need to help leaders and politicians feel accountable to actually buying in and implementing policies that reflect wellbeing economics. I think it's a massive, big collective campaign that needs to be done, because all of these things can't work in isolation. You need that wholesale system change, but first and foremost, you need the public to understand how that system change will actually better their lives in comparison to economic growth and extractive economies and GDP as being a measure of societal success.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess this comes in as well to the second point that you made in the chat, where you said that we're currently trying to work on conflict resolution between farming unions and the ENGOs. I'll let you potentially talk about this as well, but I think that really is kind of important as well, right? That to make the point that so far farmers have been pitted against the environmental movement. There's pretty much any time we have any of these kinds of proposals to shift towards more sustainable farming, you see a backlash from farming lobbies. And I think it's important to recognize that environmental protection relies on landholders, on farmers, and at the same time, farmers rely on ecosystems, on the ecosystem services that are provided by nature, right? So yeah, I think we can't build this well-being economy or this like alternative future that doesn't include or work with farmers. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you learned from this process of trying to work with ENGOs and farming unions to depolarize that relationship.
Did you want to, Nigel, come back to that one?
Just really quickly, I mean, Wales is 90% agricultural land, so you can't mitigate climate change, you can't restore biodiversity, you can't produce food if you don't bring that land with you, and you can't preserve culture, community, and their economics without bringing that whole system with you. So it is a whole systems change. And yes, I campaign for an environmental NGO, and I very much work in that polarized space in the middle. And it's the right royal pain in the arse, because, it's nuanced argument just doesn't go anywhere when you've got that such polarization going on. So what you're left with is to try come and meet the farming unions, find out what your common ground is, utilize mediation, conflict resolution, anything that's within that toolkit to create that conversation, to depolarize the sector. Because again, without it, if you don't kind of work within that conflict resolution space and suddenly create and find out what your human common values, emotive values are, or emotional values are, you can't really discover what you have in common rather than not. I think it's vital that we do it as quickly as possible because we're really short in time.
Yeah, that is one thing that is for sure, and such an important point about finding that common ground. Simon, I see that you also have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question? Oh, you're muted still.
Sorry, I don't really have a question, but a comment. I was gonna start by the tail end of Ferne's presentation, which touched on the importance of political structures and imaginaries as the two key points. And I think both Nigel and Milo have just fleshed that out. But I don't think we can stress enough how much of an obstacle these two issues are to actually shifting the system. So the imaginaries, I think this sort of conversation can help an understanding of how food is produced and how it could be produced differently. But I can't, I think it does need to be matched with the other side of the coin in terms of the consumption side of things. I don't think you can just deal with it from the production end. I lived for many years in Brazil, and I'll say, why that's important in a minute. But we did a survey on, alternative food systems, and one of the questions in the survey was, where does food come from? And the answers we got back were from the supermarket or from the fridge. Just this complete lack of awareness of actually the whole what's behind it. So that's a big challenge in terms of the imaginaries around food in our urban settings. And I'm thinking of countries like Brazil. 200 million people. I mean, it's just a big issue. And then the idea of political structures, we cannot underestimate the way that the political elites, economic elites, are able to perpetuate a dominant system. As Nigel was saying, it's a system, and Brazil was perhaps one of the global success stories in providing food and nutritional security under the Hunger Zero banner and campaign. Amazing success recognized by the FAO in dealing with food and nutritional security and poverty, and yet they were overthrown by the agribusiness elite, looking at producing sugar, maize, and soy particularly, and this elite is tied to the global trade dynamic. So this sort of very systemic. And I mean, so how do we address that power imbalance? And that's the question. And I think there again is not to look at this sectorally. I think you've touched on the importance of the interconnection, the systemic nature of this, the way that food is connected to energy and water and health and planetary health. And so we actually need to work together across these different sectors if we're going to bring about any kind of shift in either mindsets and imaginaries or in the political structures. It just, I just wanted to emphasize that. I think you've started fleshing that out, and that's where it seems to me there's the two sort of strands of work that we all can help with.
Yeah, Ferne, would you like to come in on that point? Yeah, of the power imbalance and.
Yeah, I suppose just to underline what Simon was saying, because it's about trying to connect things more and more and understand the systems, the systems that are going on there. So the project I'm working on right now, it's called Food Click. It's an EU-IA project, but it's based on a framework called the Click framework. And it's this whole thing about trying to holistically approach food systems and connect them to the other things. So C stands for, I'm going to forget them all now, but co-benefits. L stands for urban-rural linkages, so looking at these flows and the dependencies that we have across places. I stands for social inclusion, but I also think that's about participatory democracy, inclusion in decision-making processes. And the final C stands for connectivities across sectors. you know, so trying to sort of start looking at how these different sectors all relate to each other. And then, and I know these are big issues. I thank you, Simon, for drawing that out, the imaginaries and the political structure issues going on there. So in our approach, we're looking at food policy networks. And so how are alliances coming together around the world to deal and try and change some of these things? I know it's not easy. I know it's not straightforward. I know it's highly complex, but that's trying to get the alliances, and we're trying to look at how is that happening and what could happen more. So, and then the other aspect we're looking at is this integrated food policy approach. So trying to actually get policies to take a systems perspective and integrate it within policy so that they should hopefully hold for longer. So you have something to grab onto, it won't change so quickly. So again, it's not an answer. I know it's context, it depends on context, but it's something to reinforce what you were saying.
I think it's hard to answer, you know, to give the golden bullet answers or the silver bullet answers to some of these complex challenges as well. But I think that's a really important point about how food touches on so many different parts of our lives, like our education systems, labor markets, land use, technology, and innovation. What's your sense of the state of play at this stage for how that integration is actually, where are we at? Like, how far do we have to go?
To me? Or...
Yes, very, if you'd like to.
We've got a long way to go yet. I've just recently looked at integrated food policies around the world for one of the deliverables in this project. And a lot of people talk about this being a really good way of getting started. But a lot of it is aspirational. There's very few that have actually really gone ahead, and Brazil is actually one of the exceptions to that. That is seen as one of the absolutely standout, you know, examples where integrated food policy has happened. And what was the other question? There's a lot going on. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of desire, but there's still a lot more to happen in that space.
Yeah, just to get a sense of where we're at roughly. I think we've got time for one or perhaps two more questions. If people have got more questions on their mind, I'll give a little bit of time for people to reflect and think. My colleague has told me to count to 10 and that there will always be a question coming up after counting to 10. So I trust on you. Maybe then, Ferne and Milo, really briefly then, we've got about 2 minutes left. Would you, in 30 seconds, would you be happy to share a little bit more about what you're focusing on going forward? Like what is you've shared a little bit, Ferne, about FoodClick. What will be your focus for the next few years ahead?
Well, I'm working in FoodClick now. So we're very interested in this food policy networks, alliances, and integrated food policy stuff. But also, and we're doing projects on the ground in cities across Europe and extending that out to the world. I'm also really personally interested in the nature side of agriculture and trying to reconceptualize what that means in a more human way. So I'm just really I want to think that through a lot more, because I think we can really push that forward. Because I think things like nature-based solutions, while they've got a purpose in the world, there's still political edges to that we need to explore in more detail. Anyway, I could talk for a long time. I'll stop there. Things.
Thank you. And Milo, what's coming up for you if you've got 30 seconds? What's next for you?
For me, I'm finishing a master's degree at Wageningen, and I'm going to be doing a thesis, hopefully something related to food, and particularly around this kind of community-led resource and land governance approaches. How we can build kind of small-scale payments for ecosystem services schemes and these types of systems to support farmers in making this transition. Obviously, given the chat that we've just had, it's clearly not a very easy thing to do, and that support needs to come from somewhere, but I think that's something that I'm very interested in, and yeah, I'll definitely be taking a look at some of the initiatives that people have put in the chat, and taking this conversation away, and thinking a lot about that. So thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. It's a very rich chat indeed, so it's worthwhile looking at. So for today, our session is coming to an end. I've loved our conversation today. So many rich insights, complex questions still to answer. Keen to see how we can still find ways of collaboration on this. But so inspiring to hear about all these different case studies and possible ways forward. So thanks so much again to our two fantastic speakers, and also the people in the wider membership who've also contributed to this paper by reviewing and providing their thoughts and inputs. So we will be in touch afterwards to see if there are people who would like to be part of a follow-up on this topic, to see if perhaps there's space for a little working group or something like that. Now, if you're in the audience and you would like to become part of the Wellbeing Economy movement, I would highly encourage you to become a member of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance so that you can more directly engage with all of the brilliant people in our network and all of the great work that's happening there. So then with this, I'd like to thank you all for sharing your time with us today. And we really look forward to connecting and collaborating with you all again soon. Fantastic. Thanks so much again. Thank you, Milo, and thank you, Ferne.